Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thompson, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Leadership Matters. Today, we've got the pleasure of sitting down with Craig Warren, CEO of Washburn Center for Children and a curious, catalyzing change maker. I want to start with what's important for people to know about you.
I think what's important is I describe myself as having a very eclectic professional journey that really is characterized by curiosity and change.
I love that. And why do you think that speaks to you specifically so much? Curiosity and change.
I think there's an interrelationship between them. I'm a very curious person. If you spend time with me and I meet someone, I ask questions. I'm very curious, like, well, what is that about? How does that work? Like, how did you do that? And I think in a professional context, obviously within a role, that leads to change professionally. Where within my professional journey from the military to management consulting to working for Fortune 500 companies to the social sector, I feel like that's been driven for sort of a macro level kind of curiosity about the world and about professional life and a curiosity around what's possible that has driven me to be a change agent within organizations, and also has broadened my horizons professionally, not to be afraid of things that are different or unknown to me, to constantly let that curiosity drive me into different places professionally and personally.
Wow. It speaks a lot to your value, too, of being open for the discomfort that comes with change and where those curious questions will lead you.
Well, a long time ago, because I'm different now, but someone said there's value in getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think over time, that's a capacity that I've developed of being uncomfortable with being comfortable with being uncomfortable, where for other people, that's very disconcerting and can be very dysregulating. And for me, it's like, we're going to do the change. This is going to sting a little bit, and then it'll probably be okay after that.
How did you develop that comfort with being uncomfortable?
I think you put yourself out there. When you consistently, I think, do things that are challenging to you or not comfortable, I think that increases your capacity. And frankly, it increases your capacity for what even is uncomfortable. Because I feel like if you're constantly doing 10 level risks and you're doing it at 10, well, after a while, those aren't really 10s for you anymore. Like 10 sort of becomes everyone else's 10 sort of becomes your norm. And then what you're doing is kind of creating a different scale beyond that for you. Wow, someone else looks at that and they're like, wow, how could you do that? And you're doing it so easily. And for you, it's like, but I've put myself out there to do that. So that's still, I'm not maxed out. There's still more capacity within me. And I think the only way you do that is by constantly taking risk and putting yourself out there in terms of vulnerability, in terms of risk, in terms of learning. And as you do that, I feel like your capacity as a leader and as a person just grows.
That is such a powerful visual, and it makes me think of, your comfort zone. And if you can just take one step outside of it each day, it continues to grow and expand, to use your language. Where did the motivation for that journey start, Craig? I know that you said, at one point I had to learn how to be comfortable sitting in uncomfortable situations. What was the original motivator, catalyst for that? Can you think of an experience?
I think curiosity just takes you places. Like, I just think purely at an intellectual level, I'm a reader and have been a reader from a very young age. And I think if you're curious and you're a reader, that takes you to places that you didn't anticipate going, that you can either close it out and say, ooh, what is that? I don't understand that. I don't appreciate that. I don't feel comfortable with that. Do I explore that? Or even intellectually, you can lean into like, wow, they're writing about something that's not my experience and that I'm not sure I want to experience. Or I'm learning about history or something that happened or is happening and increasing my knowledge around it of like, wow, this is happening. And I don't have context around that or around the experience of that or with that. And you can either pull in from that or like withdraw, or you can lean in and say, that's not something that I have context around or that resonates with me. Why is that? And if I don't explore that further, then I don't know whether that's something like, yep, that really isn't something that's of interest to me or resonates with me, or, with additional context, I have an appreciation for the perspective, or maybe it's something that resonates with me that, I want to explore that or go there or experience that. So I think it started for me with that kind of being a reader and having that intellectual curiosity and having reading open up fictitious worlds, other people, current events and history that were outside of my normal day-to-day experience. It's like, I'm sort of intrigued by this, as opposed to, I could have been terrified by that. So I think it started there. And then obviously as you grow, you can move out of books. You choose, what clubs and things you do. You choose what activities you do. You choose what you study. You choose who your friend groups are. You choose where do you go to school and what you major in and what your professional life is. And I think that intellectual foundation of curiosity led me to places to explore different things.
Mm. And you really leaned in to that curiosity and let that continue to shape you as you continued to grow and develop.
And I think that's fun. I mean, there's a lot of talk about what diversity is or isn't, but for me, that's like critically important. Like that diversity of perspective and even understanding like what are my own experiences and identities and being self-aware around who I am. How does that relate to the world? How does the world relate to me? And as I read about other things or experience other things, who am I in connection to that? I think is also a part of that. But I feel like you don't get that
Yeah.
if you're not surrounding yourself with a diversity of perspective and language and experience. If you're just with other people who are sort of like you, or you're not exploring these things, or you're by yourself, I feel like I know who I am, and part of that is relative to my experience of others and being exposed to a wide range of experience for me to calibrate on. That's part of who I am. That's not part of who I am. That's who I want to be affiliated with or not. But that's only in relation of kind of having the full tapestry of kind of humanity to help me figure that out.
Yeah. That's so powerful. Give us some practical tips on how you can weave in more of those diverse
hmm
perspectives or those sort of change catalyzing experiences.
I think do things that I mean, I am curious. Like when something comes up where there's an opportunity to like, huh, through an alumni group or through something I'm in, it's like I know nothing about that subject, but there's an opportunity to go learn about that.
Mm.
Go do that. Or someone comes up with something that's like, oh, everyone's talking about this documentary or this book. I don't know that that's what I've read overall, but a lot of people seem to have energy around it. Let me go check it out and see that. So I think a practical piece is constantly to be risking,
Yeah.
and constantly, I guess there's a risk doing things that kind of make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. You have a little bit of trepidation about, and being intentional about leaning into that and constantly kind of filling your cup. Like one of the things I talk about with folks that I mentor professionally is I believe strongly that at least 10% of your time in any given week should be geared towards you
Mm.
in your development. And for me, and that 10% is a guide, it may be a little bit less at times, it may be a little bit more, but it's a philosophical orientation that says for me to continue to grow as a professional and as a leader, I should not just be focused on what's right in front of me and what my job is. I should be investing in myself through listening to webcasts, through reading, through being part of an association, through serving on a board, through attending a training, through interacting and networking with people who are different, or mentoring other people or connecting with other people, because that sort of keeps that like there's a constant sort of flywheel of, okay, if I'm doing that 10%, some of that is intellectually and relationship wise and professionally going to expose me to other things. And I feel like that's just been very rich for my development, where if you're not constantly doing that, I feel like you stagnate professionally. And you don't just want to be like, you don't want to have tunnel vision in terms of your leadership. You want to be exposed to other leaders who are at different points in their journey, who are in other sectors, who are doing other things to sort of kind of sharpen my own saw.
That's so good. It feels to me like you've really been very intentional. Certainly, you've got this kind of innate curiosity about
hmm
you that drives you, and you lean in. I know a lot of curious folks that don't necessarily, to use your language, take the risk
hmm
and go to that event or explore that topic or have that difficult conversation.
mm
I'm curious. It just feels like you've really ingrained that into your being
mm
now, after maybe a few years
Yeah,
of
after a
working
few
at it.
years.
So, are there any examples that you can think of where you felt that flinch that you didn't want to lean in? And how did you kind of overcome that?
I feel like one of the early instances of that is I was in ROTC, the Reserve Officers Training Corps for the Army when I was in college. So I knew I was going to go on active duty. And actually, at that point, I was seriously considering making a career out of the Army.
Mm.
And because of that, after I graduated, I actually got a deferment to get my master's in public policy because I figured if I make a career out of the Army, at some point they send you back to grad school, and at
Mm.
some point I'd be doing policy. If I still made a career of it, at some point I think I'd be in more policy roles, so that would be useful. And if I didn't make a career out of it, I probably would go into government service or I'd be doing something in the nonprofit sector, and a public policy degree would be very useful for that. So went off to got a deferment, graduated, got a deferment, went to grad school, and then was going on at duty. And I was an armor officer in the armor branch with tanks. So they say when they're getting ready to do my first assignment, well, where do you want to go? And they let you pick 10 places.
Wow.
Um, Now armor is tanks, so there's not everywhere in the world that you can go that has the infrastructure and that is appropriate for tanks. Where there's
Sure.
other parts of it where you can go anyone and you have hundreds of choices. Turns out for armor at that time, you only had 10 choices, and they had you pick 10. And what I put 10th was South Korea. And at that time, I was engaged. I was going to get married. Maybe I'd get assigned to Germany, which was an accompanied tour. And I put 10, and of course, in true Army fashion, they sent me to South Korea for what was supposed to be a 12-month tour, which is an unaccompanied tour. So if you go to Europe or other places, you could actually bring dependents with you. And for
Oh.
Korea, which is typically like a 3 or 4 year tour of duty, which is in Korea, it's a hardship tour. It's only a year. And at the level I was at, you couldn't bring your family with you.
Wow.
Um, so that was one of those things where it's like, oh, this was like, I was confident I was going to be somewhere in Europe or in the States somewhere. It's like, oh, this is one of those things of I wasn't really planning on going there. That wasn't on my bucket list. That wasn't like, oh, this is my dream assignment. It's like, oh, I committed to do this. And this is what happens when this is the needs of the service and you go there. And I had to kind of adapt to that. Like, oh, I was getting ready to get married. You're not going to have your spouse. It's the other side of the world. Um, that wasn't like oh, I had dreams of living in South Korea and everything like that. So you kind of had to emotionally kind of deal with kind of disappointment and a little bit of loss on that. And being uncomfortable because like your first assignment it's a hardship tour in that, I was stationed at Camp Casey, which is about 8 kilometers south of the demilitarized zone. So it wasn't like you were in a major city or Seoul.
Wow.
This really was not sort of in an isolated town. That was not like, oh, there's a big post and everything like that. So that was like, oh, this is my first professional job. I'm going into a leadership role. It's going to be the other side of the world. I'm in a country and a culture that I did not know a whole bunch about, that what kind of wasn't in my mindset of getting prepared to go. And that was uncomfortable, like the discomfort of your first job, and it's a first leadership job. It's in a combat, I was in a combat arm, so there's that piece of it. At that time, there was some tension. Well, I guess there continues to be tension between South Korea and North Korea, but there was heightened tensions at that time. As well, and then being away from family and being away from home, and so there were a variety of things like that where like this is really uncomfortable. Yes, at that time I thought I might make a career out of the Army, but that first assignment certainly had a lot of dimensions of that. Where like, wow, this is there's a lot of discomfort in that, and I think that was probably the first really professional experience where that crystallized there to the point of where it was a 12-month tour, and I actually wound up extending.
Wow.
6 months because there was another job that I could have gotten if I extended. So I wound up extending, but leaning into that discomfort of like, okay, this is uncomfortable. How do we get comfortable being uncomfortable? Okay, there's some opportunities here. This isn't where I thought I would be. Hey, this is sort of interesting. This is sort of, there's a job here. The culture is interesting. The dynamics of the civilian population, learning more about kind of the history, the current events and history of South Korea and everything.
Mm.
Like this is sort of my curiosity sort of kicked in there. It's like, all right, let's ride this out a little bit longer. But that probably was the first sort of professional thing where that really manifested in a way of like my nature of that curiosity and change sort of manifested, and it was uncomfortable, but it's like, let's lean into this
Yeah.
and see where this takes us.
And it really served you in that environment.
Oh, and so many. I mean, my whole experience in the military was a formative experience in my life and in my leadership. But that particular experience of um, Korea is sort of a unique circumstance at that time in terms of the Korean War never formally ended. It's sort of still in an armistice. It's not like it was actually formally ended. The tension between North Korea and South Korea, the tension of people who were my age, who were college students, who were protesting the American presence there because they thought we shouldn't be there and be occupying that, as opposed to an older generation who lived through the Korean War and remembered kind of what happened with that and had a very different view of America and just the different culture. I mean, it was just I am so grateful for that experience in retrospect, because I would not have pursued that on my own, but I took so much away from like every aspect of that process.
Aside from the leaning in with curiosity and really kind of exploring new perspectives and cultures and different ideas and some of the tension, what other key takeaways did you take away from that?
I mean, that was my first leadership job.
Mm,
So I was in a leadership, I mean, it's interesting. In ROTC, everyone who's doing that is going to go into a management role, which seemed normal because a lot of my classmates who were in ROTC, we were all doing that. So it normalized that. And you don't realize outside of that most people in college are not thinking about, oh, throughout the entire 4 years, I'm working up to being in a management role. In
yeah.
fact, most college students are working up to an individual contributor role and not a leadership role.
Yes.
And actually having that be like that first leadership role in South Korea on the other side of the world, and learning to navigate through that, where you have people who are older than you who report to you, you have people who are younger than you who have a lot more knowledgeable to you, but you're the person who has the ultimate responsibility and has to make that call, that real responsibility for people's lives. Like, I mean, all leaders have some responsibility, but when you're dealing in the military with, even if you're doing training and it's not a combatant situation, those tanks are big. Like, things can happen during training that are much more risky than most other jobs are. That even if you're in a training environment, you still have to be mindful and you're responsible for people in terms of making sure people are trained and you're doing things in the safe way and you're taking care of them and making sure that they're trained and the equipment is maintained. Because even in a training environment, if those things aren't done, people can get injured, or people they can die from that. So having the weight of that and a first leadership role and having all of that training really come together in terms of what does that mean in terms of your leadership, in terms of your values, how you interact. That difference between respecting the position doesn't mean that people are going to respect the individual. And in the military, people will respect the position, but that doesn't equate to you being effective in your role if the bar is just, well, they're just going to respect your rank and your position. And what leadership truly is like, no, the people respect more than that. And they understand kind of how you care about them, your focus on development, how you focus on training, and how you really lead. That obviously the position enables that, but real leadership is not just relying on the rank and the position. Real leadership is who you are and how your values manifest and how you develop those relationships and trust with people who look to you to make those decisions, which is very different than, well, I just have rank and I can just tell them what to do. That's an approach that probably is going to be a sort of unfulfilling and an effective approach over time.
Craig, I'm so glad that you talk about that first leadership experience and the difference between being prepared for that in a really intentional way through ROTC versus, to your point exactly, um, colleges and universities really preparing folks for that first individual contributor role, which essentially is not typically a leadership role. It's really about getting work done through your own tasks and activities, which is very different than leading people.
Yes.
So what did you take away from the ROTC program that prepared you to be a leader specifically? What was your understanding of leadership heading into kind of that first leadership role, and how did that evolve once you got into that position in such, to your point, a high stakes environment?
I mean, I think one of the things that all branches of the military do very well is individual development and leadership development. And in almost every level, doesn't matter what branch of the military you're in, though my experience was the Army, you're always trained to know something about the level above you. Because given the nature of the work, there's a high probability that if we have to do what we're trained to do, some of your peers may not be around, maybe injured or not there, or your superiors may not be. So you always need to have some awareness of, hey, I need to kind of know what the bigger picture is and what's going on, because if something happens, we need to continue to fulfill the mission. And you can't just be clueless about that. And there's not an expectation that you are clueless around that. So I think that mindset is something that through ROTC, I mean, ROTC, we take classes. I mean, ROTC, there are academic classes that you take as part of that. And there also is field training and other things you do outside of that on top of the academic courses. And it really gears you towards thinking about your leadership philosophy. What does leadership look like? They use infantry tactics to sort of teach you around leadership, around getting grounded in infantry tactics and leading small infantry units as a way of you putting your leadership into practice, and being physically fit, being physically fit in that relationship, that, and understanding history and understanding tactics, and getting mentorship and guidance from other leaders who are training you of what was their perspective, what worked for them. And they have very different styles. So you have a variety of different types of leaders with different types of experience that you see, okay, this is what they're saying in the book. And I see how this person leads and how this person leads and how they do that as well, which I think is so, that the shadow of leadership is such a real thing. And just having the opportunity to be exposed to leaders who are focused on the same outcomes, but who approach that in very different ways, I think is one of the things I've been gifted with throughout my professional career.
I want to double click on the shadow of leadership. Say more about that.
I just think and I think it's Cindelaney. I'm not sure. I think it was a Cindelaney course that I was at somewhere, where they talked about the shadow of leadership, where it's not just about with you, as I talked about earlier, where you're a manager or you're a leader and you have a positional authority, and the shadow of your leadership goes behind the positional authority. Because if you're just relying on positional authority, that just is when I'm proximate to you. So I'm right in front of you. So it's here. So obviously there's going to have more weight because I'm here in space with you and I'm telling you to do something and you're going to do that. What's really the testament of a leader is, which shadow do you cast when you're not there? So when I walk out of the room and I'm over here and you're not there, what is the shadow of leadership I've cast? And is that as strong as my presence when I'm here? Or is my shadow diminished? Or is my shadow incongruent with when I'm here with you? And is the shadow of my leadership different than that? And that shows up in terms of how you, who are part of my team or in my sphere, show up outside of that. So that shadow of leadership is really important, because most leaders aren't spending the majority of their time with the people that are reporting to them or with their teams.
Yeah.
So how they're kind of concentrating that time when they are together to set the expectation, to create the trust, to role model that. So the shadow of leadership just says, whether I'm in the room or not, I have confidence of how people are going to show up and what they're going to do, because I know the shadow of leadership I've cast and what the expectation is and how that shows up for them. And each leader kind of has that cascading shadow of their leadership. That's when you're not in the room, kind of what leadership shadow is cast.
Mm-hmm. It's such a powerful concept, and has become even more present since COVID-19 and the transition of hybrid work environments, which in a lot of cases transition fully to remote work for a period of time. And how do you be intentional, to your point, with the limited in-person time that you have, and really equip your team members to contribute in really meaningful ways, whether you're there or not?
Well, I feel fortunate that I had the opportunity to manage global teams before we had the technologies that we have today. And frankly, being in Korea before we had the technologies that we had today. So my leadership is driven by, I have a bias and deep appreciation for the value of being in person. And even if it's not in person all the time. So I remember having teams in Poland or having teams in Brussels, and the one or two times a year or every other year that they'd be able to come over and visit, or we'd be able to go visit them, and how meaningful and impactful that was in terms of reinforcing or deepening relationships or starting relationships if it was new, and also how you have to put the work in outside of that. That shadow is still there, whether you had Zoom or you had to go into the super teleconference room, and they had to have a teleconference room, and basically no one did that. And how do you develop that? Through written communication, through letters, through email, through telephone calls, when you just had telephone calls or teleconferences and things to do that, to do the same things, where it is good as the in-person. I have a bias that says there's nothing that beats in person. I mean, maybe we'll get holograms or something like that will replicate that. But for right now, there are things that are, there are ways on the continuum, but I feel like getting that in person, you can't replicate that, but you need to put in the work then to kind of bolster that up, to offset the fact that there's some loss of signal in terms of that when you're not in person. which I think, I mean, Zoom and some of these other things have made it so much better that you can actually see the person. When it was just on a phone call
Yeah.
and the phone lines were not good and there may have been language things or whatever, you had to work a lot harder, with that. But you just have to be intentional around those things and really focusing on the relationships with that.
Yeah.
I think in particular when you have that, even across Zoom, I think people to some degree are lazy
Hmm.
around that because they didn't have that context of in person and knowing like how you take advantage of that in person time. And when you had in person time, there was social because that relation, whenever someone came over, you went over, there was always some type of meal or multiple meals or some type of social thing because that's so critical to building that trust and the relationship and getting to see who people are. So when you're on the phone line, it's like, I know who he is. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. Or I know what he's
Yeah.
really like, or I've seen him in person. So I know how to take that on the phone if there's a silence or they communicate in a different way and how to leverage that. And you can do those things with Zoom and with virtual teams. I think it's even easier to do that, but you have to be intentional. And people are like, well, Zoom, you can't do that. It's like, no, you have to be more intentional and thoughtful around how you create that, but you actually you can replicate some of that. I don't think it's the same, but it can get you to 80 or 90%, which is still
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah. It's such a great point, Craig, about being intentional. And what I also heard in that is sort of the humanness behind all of these interactions. I recently received, probably a month ago, a voice text
Mm.
from somebody. And I didn't know her very well. And I don't even think I had a one-on-one interaction with her, but we had each other's contact info. And she sent me just a very thoughtful, not perfectly articulate, but
Mhm.
human voice memo. And I instantly felt so much closer to
Mhm.
her as a person. And it was just a simple, instead of, reading a text, which I read text all day between my phone, my emails, everywhere.
Yep.
That's all I see. And there's how are you intentional about sort of the connection that's at the root of our work together? So I want to go back to that first leadership role.
Mhm.
And we can take all the classes and we can read all the books and we can learn all the things. And then we can get into that first leadership role and look around and be like, what are we doing?
Mhm.
What's something that you couldn't have learned or something that the books and the classes and the trainings couldn't have prepared you for in leadership?
When things don't go the way you think they're going to go.
Mm.
And it's not always the things that you think are hard. There are other things that don't go the way, and you're like, how do we wind up here? With that. And I remember multiple instances as a junior officer, where it's like, oh, this is supposed to be a slam dunk, and it wasn't a slam dunk.
Mm.
And then how you kind of navigate through that and have the resilience of that.
Can you give us an example of something like that happening and
Like
what you
I
did?
remember, one of the things you have to do, as an armor officer, you have to qualify your tank. So as an armor officer, we had M1 A1 tanks, and there's a crew on the tank. So you have to qualify. Even though I'm responsible for a platoon of 4 tanks, you still have to qualify your tank because everything I have to be qualified on how to do everything on the tank, how to load all the positions and how to drive it and how to fire it and load it, and then how that team works together where you actually qualify your tank on a range
Mm.
so that the team that tank unit is working together on that. You have to qualify that. Um, and the first qualification did not go well. And you do there's simulators and everything before you get out to the range. So I'm in Korea, we're at the range, it starts at night, we're doing it, and it did not go well. And things were not clicking for the team. We were the last tank, like in our unit, and we were up until like 1 a.m, kind of, because they're not going to let you go until you qualify. And you're doing it, it's not going well,
Yeah.
and you're getting frustrated.
Yes.
The team's getting frustrated because like, wow, we've got this new lieutenant, we're supposed to be making him look good, and this isn't going, and now he's out there,
Yes.
and everybody knows.
Emotions
On
are
that.
running
Yeah,
high.
emotions are running high
They're
on
getting
that.
tired.
And what do you do with that?
Mm.
Like, is the leadership in that moment to give in to that frustration of, wow, I'm really embarrassed and ashamed because it's supposed to be a slam dunk and I've got to do this and I feel inadequate. I feel like I'm not competent. What's going on here? I'm going to look bad in front of my superiors, in front of the other people who are on my team. And I'm supposed to know how to do this. Like, we should be able to do this. And how you navigate through that. And that probably was not my finest hour, in terms of constructively navigating through that. But then after that experience, it's like, oh, this is something that didn't think was going to go this way, that went that way, that now I took lessons away on, okay, we need to train more. What do I take away from this so this doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
And what is the impact on the people, and how do you navigate and how do you lead in that moment?
Yeah.
Because they're looking to you, and are you going to give in to the frustration in that
Mm.
moment, which I did a little bit, or you're going to be like, nope, we got this. Let's take a breath. I believe in you all. I have confidence. We're going to figure this out and get through this.
Yeah.
Which we got to that, but that wasn't where we started. And that was a great learning of like, oh, like they talk about you're going to fail, but this is something that is not a big whatever thing, but had the emotional impact and the weight of that. In the broader scheme of things, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's like when you take your driver's license, everyone doesn't pass a test all the time. That's not an indicator of your future success in life. It feels like that. And that felt like one of those things of like, oh my gosh, my career's over. Like emotionally, am I going to be able to do this? And I actually feel grateful for having that experience earlier on, because then you can see, oh, I had something that I thought was like this thing and it wasn't. And you can take learning and coaching from that. And when these things happen, a lot of times it's not the end of the world. It can still feel like that, but having that of what felt like that, it's like, well, that really felt like that and it wasn't. So how do I calibrate and take that way over time? And then how does that show up in my leadership when things don't go the way that they could? What impact does my shadow of leadership have on the people around me with that?
Yeah. I'm so grateful that you shared that. I think I have had those world-ending moments where, gosh, you feel like I should have done that differently.
Mm,
I could have done that differently. And it's not talked about a lot. And it's so easy to look at a LinkedIn profile and see an accomplished CEO like yourself and think, man, he has really got it all figured out and has probably never made a single mistake in his life. I know some people look at my LinkedIn profile and they think it was a very linear career. And my goodness, have I stumbled along that path? And I think by talking about it, it gives people permission to talk about their own
mm.
stumbles and to relate that none of us are doing this perfectly, but the important thing is to own the mess, clean it up, learn from it, and move on, which is what it sounds like you did.
Well, and I just think that's so important, because one of the things I'm grateful for is I have had those experiences earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had the experience of getting laid off very early in my career, which once again was another thing that had nothing to do with what I did. They were getting rid of I was in a consulting firm and they were getting rid of the practice I was in. And there were like, I think 300 of us around the world whose positions were eliminated, but it felt like it felt like the end of the world.
Yeah.
But out of that kind of perceived failure, because at that time layoffs were not as common, so there really was more of, now it's like, it's unfortunately it's become rather commonplace. And then it was like, well, if you got laid off or something like that, there was something wrong with you, because that wasn't as common as it is now. And in going through that experience of realizing what came out on the other side of that,
Yeah.
like that was a blessing, because of the opportunities that came out of that to go off on my own and have a consulting firm, the relationships I built because of that, the confidence I got from that, the skills I developed from that experience, working through that emotionally of like my worth is not tied to my work. Like I still have value that's independent of the job that I do. Because when the job went away and I did other things, I still had value. People still respected me. Family still respected me. I still had friends and professional relationships. And I feel so grateful that I had that experience relatively early in my career. And then I wasn't someone who I've now seen people subsequent who
Mm.
they're 20 or 30 years in and they never had any of that type of adversity. And then something happens and it's like, they're 20 or 30 years into the career and they've never, like, that's, I mean, it was devastating for me, but I was young and resilient and had a runway. And I've had other subsequent things. They didn't have that. And it's
Yeah.
like devastated. Like, how do I navigate that? So I feel like I mean, that's part of why I'm a proponent of the risk, because in my own life,
Mm.
taking those risks, having those failures, putting yourself out there, dusting yourself up. Sometimes it's of your own volition. Sometimes the universe just, that's what needed to happen at that time. But I think that builds a resiliency and a confidence that I think is so useful, that if things kind of consistently go your way, I think you're missing out in terms of an opportunity for your full potential to develop, because you only know that kind of when you go through those crunchier aspects of life.
Yeah.
And if you're sort of like the golden child with that, you're probably good at what you're doing, intelligent and capable. But I feel like until you've gone through some of those failures or tension points, you don't really know who you are.
Mm. I really appreciate your perspective on that. And It's interesting hindsight. I have similar experiences as well in terms of some of those moments just feel like, what am I gonna do? I'm never gonna get on the other side of this, and some of them can really challenge our identity. Who am I? I thought I was this invaluable leader or consultant or whomever, and now I have somebody in an authority position telling me otherwise. Who am I? So, how did you pick yourself up from that layoff? How did you move through that?
You put one step in front of the other. Like, I mean, one of the things in the Army, um, one of the tactical things that sticks in my mind that's not in that context is if you're in the middle of an ambush, you keep moving.
Mm,
Because if you're going through an ambush and you stop, that's what they want you to do, is to stop. But if you're in an ambush and you move through the ambush, then you're going to move through the ambush and there's something on the other side. And that is sort of a metaphor. When things are hard, do you want to get stuck and stay where you're at? Which is almost you're guaranteed for that not to feel good and for it to be stagnant versus, hey, if you keep moving, you're creating a broader range of opportunities. So anything with life, if you're putting one step forward or you're putting that forward, like I feel like you're creating a broader range of opportunities, or if you just stay where you're at emotionally or intellectually or physically, that's limiting the range of things that are going to happen. So I think that that concept of keeping moving physically and just emotionally and professionally, I think is really, really, really important. When something happens, don't be stuck. Like,
mm,
do a pity party, take a minute, to sort of pull it together and then get the support around you or get what you need to kind of get moving again.
that's really good. I heard that mindset, and I've heard this thread throughout your entire story here. That mindset is so
Mm.
critical. But mindset alone isn't going to do it. You've
Mm-mm.
got to commit to
Yep.
action. And I love how you brought in this extra layer of getting the support that
Mhm.
you need to move through. So, we had the opportunity to talk a little bit before we started
Mhm.
shooting about. I was really struck by your experience serving children through your work with the Children's Museum and now as CEO of Washburn Center for Children. Tell me more about how you've been drawn into this line of work.
I mean, I think I work at a therapeutic organization, so as I reflect on where that might have come from, I think certainly think the fact that I had a father who was a pediatric dentist and a mother who spent the majority of her career as a social worker in child protective services imbued in me um, a sense of the importance of the health and well-being of children. I grew up in a household where clearly people were doing that in different ways professionally, so I certainly think that kernel or that seed was there for me. And then I was, I think, fortunate as I came back to the nonprofit sector. I would add another layer to that because I also worked at Greater Twin Cities United Way that had a huge focus on early childhood and it continues to have that. So that thread of United Way made a lot of investments in early childhood. The Children's Museum was all about kids learning and developing through play. And at Washburn, we're really about nurturing the well being and full potential of all children and their families through transformative mental health care. So I feel really fortunate as I've come to the social sector that I've been able to take that personal passion and interest in the well being of kids and manifest that in my professional roles through the missions of the organizations I've been fortunate to work at. And I think that goes back to that sort of, I did some other things for a period of time that played into other aspects of myself, but I'm feeding that sort of seed, I guess, is flowering within me for the last decade or so.
Mm. I shared with you privately and will share publicly. I have such a heart for children,
Mm.
and I just find, especially how you articulate it, just so admirable and inspiring. So thank you for serving such important populations. How has that work changed you as a leader?
Mm. I think I've become, particularly at Washburn, because what we do, most of the majority of our staff are therapists, and they're therapists who take care of kids who are experiencing some type of mental illness. So I think that has changed me because being with therapists, like having been in a variety of other sectors,
Yeah.
I would say that the degree of emotional intelligence and emotional awareness in an organization that's predominantly made up of women who are therapists who take care of kids who many of whom experience some type of trauma, there's a high degree of emotional intelligence in order to do that work, which translates into the culture of the organization, which I actually think is one of the amazing aspects of our culture. Um,
Extraordinary.
because these are people who are trained in sort of trauma-informed practices. They're used to dealing with kids, and kids can get dysregulated, and you can't get pulled into that. Certainly as a parent, but certainly as a therapist, even you have even more skills around that. And I think some of that has rubbed off on me in terms of being generally impatient, and have proudly become more patient
Mm.
as I see the patience and care which our therapists kind of use when they're interacting with kids and their families that are going through things. So that certainly has impacted me in that being more reflective, like
Mhm.
even naming, hey, this is what's going on for me and this is why, and naming this is the support I need, which in a lot of the other, certainly was not the case in the Army. And I would say even in consulting or in corporate America, that may have happened, but that wasn't the norm. Whereas here, it's quite normal for people just not to bottle up inside and say, hey, I'm entering this space and I'm a little frazzled because my kid did this morning or something happened with a family member, whatever. And I'm still here and I'm present, but I'm just going to name that I may be a little bit distracted. And people say, well, what support do you need? Do we need to, I mean, that's such a constructive and healthy dynamic, which I think all workplaces with benefits would benefit from. That's quite common within that organizational culture that has impacted me in terms of how do I bring that kind of energy potentially into other spaces that I'm in to think about that.
Yeah, I'm sitting here smiling and nodding alongside you. Because I came from an organization that really didn't have a lot of focus on internal culture and employee well-being. And I remembered, I've shared my story before, not knowing what was next for me after
Mhm.
that. But I remember coming across the Bailey Group website and thinking, man, these people, they create healthy workplace environments for humans to thrive so that the organizations that
Mm.
they serve can thrive. And I just remember thinking, like, if I can't find, and I had such a low bar for like a workplace environment. I was like, if I can't find something that's not toxic, here, I'm like doomed in the world of corporate America. And it was such a like almost culture shock to
Mhm.
me, like to my nervous system, to my body in a lot of different ways. How did you navigate that transition? I mean, you kind of went from opposites, I'm assuming, and maybe this isn't the case, but coming from a military background,
Mhm.
which is so direct, and at least my understanding or assumptions that I made about it are that it's less of like this therapy based or trauma
Mhm.
informed approach to emotional intelligence and creating and holding space. What
Well,
was that
it's
transition
actually I actually think about those bookends of my career because well, this isn't the end of my career, but I certainly started in a place where you're dealing with traumatic events,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
and you're dealing with trauma in a different way,
Interesting.
and I thought about this a lot since being at Washburn, that in that context, some of the trauma informed practices that are standard in us as a therapeutic organization, dealing with folks who've experienced trauma, I question how effective they would be in the military. Because
Interesting.
if someone's trying to kill you and they're shooting at you, is that the time to really do a whole bunch of self-reflection and everything like that? Arguably not. Whereas in a relationship with therapist, everything we do is about relationship and context, and let's understand the context, and let's understand where it's coming from and how it may be impacting behaviors today. And it's very reflective in the moment, which some of those practices would be appropriate some after the fact, but in the moment they wouldn't be there, and how those are both probably appropriate for what the
Yeah.
objectives of those two different organizations are. Having very different approaches to traumatic experience probably makes sense. And there probably is something to merge in the middle where the military could take a little bit of that, and Washburn could take a little bit more of, maybe we don't need to be sort of constantly being therapist about things. Maybe we actually need to run an organization and do that and focus a little bit on the outcomes a little bit more. And the military could be, it's not all the time, but we could probably infuse some of that. And I think
Mm.
about that bookend a lot because my background and experience is so different than the majority of our therapists in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what their training is, in terms of their professional experiences. And I have a very different context for that. And I have a growing appreciation of the value of both for at different times for different reasons.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Craig. It I can hear the thread that we were talking about earlier in terms of your curiosity and your desire to bring diverse perspectives or diverse ways of thinking to continue to evolve and enhance how we're operating and the
Mm.
effectiveness. And it's so nuanced. And
Mm.
I just think how you articulated that was just really well put. And I can tell that you've done a lot of reflection on that. So, what would be something that would surprise people about your role as CEO? You know, a lot of people look at that title and think, wow, that person has reached the upper echelons of organizational hierarchy. Um, let's peel back the curtain a little bit on what it means to be a CEO. What have you learned, and what would be what would surprise people about being a CEO?
I think one of the things that's surprising is the amount of sort of mundane things that come with that role
Mm,
that you don't, that is not what anyone ever talks about. It's not what's in the movies or books about that. But as the person who's at the top of the organization, like there's stuff you have to sign stuff. Like there's stuff that because of your role and what that position is, there's a lot of things you have to review and sign on that because of your role. That's not particularly cool or sexy, but you
yeah.
got to know what's going on and you got to sign that. And you have to approve things. And there's things you need to be involved with that are sort of the administrivia, which are critical to the smooth running of an organization, are not necessarily the coolest thing. But in that role, there still is quite a bit of those things because of the nature of the role. And there's only one of those. And that's where a lot of that lies. But I think people would be surprised by, like, oh, you have to do that, like that type of stuff, and that's like that's like a portion of your time that, and it doesn't go away. There's a constant kind of drumbeat of that type of activity that's like you can't delegate, you can't put away.
It's a great reminder that everybody, no matter, you know, where you sit on the org chart, everybody has parts of their roles that are more invigorating, and
Yeah,
you just got to get to other parts that you just got to get done.
yeah. So there's definitely like there's quite a bit of that that I think is surprising. I also think, what else do I think is, I mean, I think the toggling, like you really need to be, I believe others may believe differently, but I really believe like I've got to be forward thinking.
Mm.
I've got to be thinking into the future for the organization to make sure the organization's still around in a way that's sustainable for the employees and staff. I've got to be aware of the external environment in terms of our particular field, the external environment in terms of like the government environment, the political environment, the philanthropic environment, what's going on with the stock market and the economy, which can impact the philanthropic environment. So there's a lot of external things that you need to pay attention to and be focused on so you can have that sort of forward looking view. And you're the chief executive officer. So, yes, and you've still got to execute and make sure the day-to-day things are getting done, which pulls you in two different directions sometimes, depending on the complexity and challenges of what's going on, can really stretch that. But you really need to do both, because at the end of the day, it's about getting things done, not getting things done tomorrow. It's about getting the things we've already said we were going to do yesterday and the things we're saying we're doing today done, while balancing, making sure that we're making the adjustments and setting the direction so we can do those things in the future. And that can feel like you're like Plastic Man, getting pulled and very depending on the week or the time and different directions with that.
Absolutely. And you really, I'm so glad you brought up the point of this forward thinking. It's such a broad lens that you have to be looking through, because you are sort of the sole person who's looking out
Hmm.
5, 10, 15 years. And yet, to your point, there's day to day realities that
Mhm.
have to get executed
Mhm.
on. So tell us, from your perspective, what do you think are some very present challenges that CEOs grapple with in this day and age?
I was on a webinar and I heard them use the term crisis stacking,
Mm.
which when they said that, I felt that before they even described what it was, like I felt that in my soul of like, oh, I know exactly. You've given words to something that I've been experiencing.
I felt it too.
And I
You
think
just
that's
said it.
very like this idea of, if you're a CEO or leader of any organization, there are a variety of external crises which seem to be happening, which are not specific to your sector, of not of your they're not because of decisions you made or didn't make. They're just this stuff going on that is going to kind of compress and land on you that you're going to have to deal with and navigate. And a lot of them there's no crystal ball for you to foretell them. You
Mm.
can guarantee there's going to be more of them, and you better create capacity for you to navigate them. But your odds of getting very clear on what they are, where they're going to come from, aren't be there. Other than I'm pretty confident some things are going to come over the wall, and we're going to feel them come over the wall. I'm not quite sure what the majority of those are going to be. So I think that crisis stacking um, mindset. I think having an understanding of that I find useful because
Mm.
that changes your horizon and that lets you manage your energy and capacity in a different way.
Mm.
Because if we're in an environment, we're doing a 5 or 10 year plan, you could put energy against that, but the probability that's going to be anywhere near where you're going to wind up or the environment's going to be the same as low gives you a mindset of, okay, we need a compass.
Mm.
We don't need necessarily a map with a path all laid out. What we need is a compass, and directionally, regardless of whatever else happens, we want to make sure we're generally going in this direction. And this is generally the way we want to show up or the path we want to take to do that, but not be too prescriptive in terms of that because that'll be wasted energy and it might be frustrating on that because we know these crises are going to stack around us and we just know
Yeah.
that. So accommodating that, I think that has been huge for me for understanding that and then how I manage my energy associated with that.
I remember my first time meeting you. I could feel your energy.
Hmm.
And then you said you identify as an introvert, and I thought, okay, super intentional then, if that's what it is. So give us a sense. What are the types of things that energize you? You talked about a whole lot of very great depictions of kind of what your day-to-day energy requirements are needed for. What are the things that really energize you in this season of life?
I think I mean I'm always energized by talking about our work.
Mm.
I think there's a children's mental health crisis that's going on. I don't think enough people understand that a crisis exists, that the
Mm.
crisis is exacerbated by kind of continued underinvestment in our children's mental health infrastructure. So talking to people around that and raising awareness around that, I find that energizing.
Can we go there for just a
Sure.
minute? So, what do you think is most important? I'm so glad you brought this up.
Mhm.
Let's dive into that. What's most important for people to know about that?
That we are in the midst of a children's mental health crisis, which exacerbated during COVID.
Mm.
And relative to children's development, even though COVID was coming up on 6 years ago, we're still seeing the effects of that. Like not like at a degraded level, at like we're still seeing that. And I
Mhm.
think that's important for people to know. I think it's important for people to know that there are evidence-based practices that work.
Mm.
Like if you get the care soon and early and we do early interventions, there's things that work where you may not need therapy for an extended period of time or you may not need it forever. So there's a lot of talk with adults around adverse childhood experiences,
Mhm.
ACEs.
Mhm.
A lot of the people who are experiencing ACEs didn't get the therapeutic support they needed as a child. And at whatever point that happened, it grew into adulthood. It continued to create other challenges for them that weren't resolved. And they tie it back to something that happened in childhood, but they didn't get the support they needed. And now it's creating challenges for them as an adult. If we invest in children's mental health, that event that happened just becomes an event that happened, that you got the support you needed, you worked through it, you figure out the skills you needed to do, and then you went on with your life and to
Yeah.
reach your full potential. And I wish people knew there were more things like that with investing in this for our kids earlier on, because our kids are experiencing mental illness at much higher rates, has a societal benefit. And there's going to be a societal cost, which we're experiencing, of the fact that we haven't invested in that. And kids are experiencing more mental illness and more severe mental illness. And that's creating challenges in the schools. And it's also beginning to create challenges in the workforce. As those kids graduate and go into a workforce, that in a work environment that typically is not very mental health friendly, that is
Mhm.
very somewhat regressive in terms of its perspective, in terms of the benefits plans and the benefits policies, and how leaders lead around employees who have children or
Mm.
people in their lives who are navigating mental illness or navigating mental illness themselves.
I feel like we could talk for like 5 more hours. Um, so I heard awareness is key.
Mm-hmm.
Awareness is really critical for us adults of the world
Yep.
to be really aware of the challenges, the crisis that we're in the midst of, and to your point, how impactful early intervention
Mm.
is. Um, I'm an adult, what should I be looking for in terms of when to uh, contemplate early intervention for the little people around me in my family or otherwise, and what resources are available?
If you have kids in your life, I strongly recommend there's a course called an 8-hour course called Youth Mental Health First Aid.
I've never
And just
even
like
heard
the
of it
Red
before.
Cross has like their first aid courses, this is about mental health. And mental health manifests differently for kids and even kids at different ages than it does for adults,
Mm,
which is why there actually is an adult version and there is a kid version. But I encourage people to Washburn offers that, a variety of organizations offer that because it schools you in what are some of the terms, what are some of the symptoms, what are type of resources are available, what do you do if someone's in crisis, and how do you keep yourself safe and how do you keep that kid safe until you can get additional help. So I highly recommend that caregivers or parents kind of do a youth mental health first aid course because I think there's a lot of useful information there to help folks level set around that. And then I'd say a big thing, and this is more on the extreme, so I'll say, but where you should start to be concerned is, regardless of age, if your child isn't doing than things they normally do. Because every child developmentally, there's a wide range of what is normal developmentally appropriate, and what's normal for your kid may not be what's the norm for another kid.
mm-hmm.
But if your kid suddenly um, is not doing things that they normally did, I'd pay attention to that. Your child used to hop out of bed every day and was excited to get to school, and you have to drag them out of bed. They used to love playing a particular sport, and now they're like, I can't stand that anymore. I don't want to do that. They used to really, really into academics, and they're not into academics. They used to be very fastidious about their appearance, and now they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Or they used to be slob, and suddenly they're like being very particular. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's whatever. So if there's those significant changes in behavior over an extended period of time where you're like, I wonder what's going on with that. And obviously, always being attuned if there's some obviously traumatic event. So if there's a loss of a pet or a loss of a family member, or they experience some type of event like the Annunciation shooting like there's some obvious things where it's like, I think I'm going to pay a little bit more attention. And because of the nature of that event, I may be paying more attention and just kind of exploring that further just because I know they experienced something that is sort of outside of the norm. And I just, independent of everything else, kind of want to keep a closer eye.
How effective is so I take my children to well child visits
Yep.
regularly. How effective how much of this is a systemic issue in terms of screening for some of these early interventions? Um, how much can we as parents rely on some of these, once a year, check all the boxes and have your primary childcare provider um, detect some of these things versus how much of this is really squarely in the parents or the caregivers or the advocates bucket of responsibilities?
I think it's both. So there are some screenings that schools may do, or screenings that a pediatrician or general practitioner may do, where they may identify some things that this is worth exploring. But there are also events or things that happen in the moment outside of that where the screening could have been fine, but that was 6 or 9 months ago, and something just happened, which tips. So I feel like that's why I say it's both, because the adults who are in a kid's life are going to be more in a position to notice when there's something going on with that kid that raises a flag or isn't the norm. Where I guess with the younger kids, you may get shots and stuff more frequently, but they're not really in a position to know. Yeah, like they don't know what a baseline for your
Right.
they don't really know what's a baseline for your kid is. So those screenings are useful,
Yeah.
and I think a part of a holistic kind of strategy for that. But I think the perspective of the caregiver, I think is more important because there's a lot of time between those visits, and they don't know your kid, and your kid's growing.
Yeah.
Like if you think with a pediatrician, like you go in at 3 months or 6 months or a year, there's so much growth and development that's happening with that child that your healthcare professional isn't going to be in a position to notice like what is sort of the baseline for that child for these type of things, unless it's some extreme, something extreme where they're in crisis.
Yeah. This has been such a joy and such a privilege to talk with you and learn more about your journey, your background, and your passion and your energy. So thank you for sharing it with
No, you're
us.
welcome. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a bit.
Anytime. And like I said, maybe we'll connect offline and I can pick your brain even further. Thank you, Craig.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters.
If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.